She escaped her toxic marriage with nothing but a carry-on bag and a one-way ticket to Washington, D.C. The man beside her seemed composed, powerful, even kind. What she didn't know, he was Admiral Hayes, and her name was written in a classified file he hadn't opened in 3 years. The file tied her to a secret her husband had killed to protect. The bruise on Lucille Roney's wrist was still dark when she handed her boarding pass to the flight attendant. "First class, lucky day," the woman said with a smile. Lucille didn't return it. Luck had nothing to do with it. She'd maxed out the last credit card her husband didn't know about. That single swipe had bought her freedom, or something close to it. Her heels clicked softly down the narrow aisle. Business travelers glanced up from their champagne glasses and glowing screens, none of them seeing her as anything but another tired woman on the run from nothing in particular. Lucille kept her scarf tight around her throat, covering the faint mark shaped like a man's hand. Just find your seat. Just breathe. Just disappear. Row 2, window seat. Perfect. She could press her forehead against the glass and pretend she was already gone, already someone else. But when she reached her row, someone was already there. A man. He wore a crisp white naval uniform, ribbons gleaming under the cabin lights. His posture was impossibly straight, his expression calm but unreadable. The kind of man who had spent a lifetime making chaos look like order. "Excuse me," Lucille murmured. He looked up. For a heartbeat, his face changed, recognition flickering behind his steady blue-gray eyes before it vanished beneath military composure. "Of course," he said, rising with quiet precision to let her pass. His voice was low, deliberate. American, but the kind of American that came from command decks and briefing rooms, not suburbia. As she slipped into her seat, she caught a glimpse of the tablet on his tray. Tactical maps. Satellite grids. Redacted documents stamped confidential. He closed it quickly. Lucille exhaled, unsure why her heart was pounding. She turned toward the window, her fingers brushing the worn leather of her carry-on. Inside it, wrapped in an old sweater, was a compact mirror. It was the only thing she'd grabbed from Daniel's office before running. She didn't know why, only that he guarded it like a weapon. Outside, the runway lights blurred as the engines roared to life. Lucille gripped her seatbelt. Just get there. Just get safe. Beside her, Admiral Hayes typed something on his encrypted device, then froze when her name flashed across his screen. Lucille Roney, primary contact, Project Lyre. Status: asset lost. He turned his head slightly, studying the woman beside him. Her pulse trembled at her throat, her breathing shallow, her left hand still bearing the mark of ownership. And Hayes realized with quiet certainty she wasn't running from a man. She was running from a secret. Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane reached cruising altitude, casting soft amber shadows across the rows. Lucille had fallen asleep against the window, her scarf still clutched in one hand like armor. Hayes sat beside her, motionless but alert, the glow from his encrypted tablet illuminating the ribbons on his chest. He entered his secure passphrase, a string of randomized biometrics and naval-grade cryptography. The screen unlocked to a database that wasn't supposed to exist, Project Lyre. The name Roney appeared like a ghost rising from deep water. Daniel Roney, target class red. Below it, a handful of linked subfiles glimmered. Hayes tapped one open and scanned the information. A list of corporations, dummy shell fronts, one flagged as neural interface diagnostics. And beneath that, in small type, test subject, L. Roney, consent status, unverified. He inhaled quietly, gaze flicking toward the woman curled beside him, unaware she had ever been tagged in a military black file. Her husband hadn't just exploited defense contracts, he had made his own wife a component in classified AI development. Hayes scrolled through metadata, therapy session logs, EEG scans, emotional response graphs. Every time she cried, every time she panicked, Daniel had recorded it. A neural map built from her fear. Hayes felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his face blank. Protocol demanded he report high-value persons immediately, especially if tied to breached government projects. But instincts built over decades of covert operations warned him not to move too soon. Homeland might be compromised, or worse, manipulated by the same hands Admiral Roney used to grease global pipelines. Hayes had seen this before: soft betrayals masquerading as clinical data, betrayal wrapped in science. He tapped into the Tribunal's encrypted database, searching cross-references for Project Lyre. The briefing he'd received 6 months ago had been deliberately vague: early-stage neuro-AI, limited field testing, multiple ethics violations buried under cognitive behavioral enhancement. What they hadn't said was that the prototype wasn't theoretical. It had a heartbeat, and it was breathing beside him. He pulled up Lucille's session transcripts, most flagged under neurofeedback optimization. But the language was off. Too clinical. Too exact. Subject showed predictable neurological suppression when prompted with marital pressure scenarios. Subject maintained compliance threshold after third serotonin dampening cycle. Hayes clicked one more file and a video loaded. The footage was grainy, time-stamped 2 years earlier. Lucille sat in a dimly lit medical office, electrodes on her scalp, eyes distant. She flinched at every question asked by the unseen clinician. A voice, female, monotone, read from a script. "Do you feel safe with your husband?" Lucille hesitated, then nodded. The screen tracked a spike in heart rate. "Good," the clinician said. "We'll mark that as baseline fidelity." Hayes paused the video, disgust bubbling just beneath his uniformed calm. This wasn't enhancement. This was conditioning. They hadn't mapped her mind, they'd rewritten how it responded to control. And Admiral Roney had built that system using her body, her trust, and her silence. Lucille stirred beside him, shifting in her sleep. Hayes quickly locked the tablet, returning it to its case as she blinked her eyes open. "Sorry," she whispered, straightening. "I didn't mean to, you're fine," he said gently. "Long flight. Get comfortable." Her lips twitched, somewhere between a smile and apology, and she turned toward the window again. Hayes studied her face in the dim cabin light. There was a sharpness to her features, beauty, yes, but shaped by years of restraint. Like something elegant pressed into silence. It wasn't the bruises that told the story. It was the way she always seemed to be bracing for the next hit. He debated his next move carefully. If he told her what he knew now, it might trigger panic and alert systems they hadn't even considered. Her bag could be bugged. Her body could be tagged. Project Lyre was unregulated enough to have fused biology with tech. There were gaps in the documentation, too many to ignore. Still, he needed more than suspicion. He needed evidence that could stand up in tribunal review. He slipped back into the secure portal and ran a deeper trace. He wasn't supposed to access live monitoring, but he'd built this system himself. And in this case, he was the only one with the clearance and the conscience to follow it through. A blinking node flared on the screen. Device ID, compact mirror // status, active / transmission, intermittent pulse. Hayes' eyes narrowed. The compact she mentioned earlier, the one in her carry-on. He checked the signal. It was pinging back to a private IP node in Prague. That wasn't just surveillance. That was exfiltration. Lucille turned again. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Of course," Hayes replied, softening his voice. Why are you being kind to me?" She looked down, then back up. "You don't even know me." Hayes held her gaze for a beat. "People don't have to know your past to recognize that you're surviving something." She looked away, but her hands clenched in her lap. "He told me I was crazy. That the therapy was for my stress. That I wasn't processing reality clearly. But it always felt off." "You were right to listen to that feeling," Hayes said. "Even if no one else did." She gave a faint laugh, brittle at the edges. "I thought I was imagining it all. Until I found the mirror." Hayes leaned forward just slightly, careful not to alarm her. "Can I see it?" Lucille hesitated, then reached into her bag. She pulled out a gold compact with a floral pattern, old and worn at the hinges. It was sitting on his desk, next to his hard drive. "Something told me to take it." She opened it slowly, revealing a perfectly polished mirror, too polished. I knew it wasn't right. It's heavier than it should be. Hayes took it gently. With a flick, he removed the backing. Inside, a wafer-thin metallic plate blinked once before fading to black. Embedded within it, a microtransmitter, encrypted and military-grade. Hayes looked up, his expression unreadable. You weren't imagining it. She stared at him. What is it? A data siphon, he said calmly. Built to collect and transmit everything from biometric patterns to location metadata. Probably feeding it straight to a secure server tied to Daniel's off-grid operations. Lucille's mouth parted, no sound coming out. Lucille, Hayes said softly, your husband didn't just monitor you. He built a neural fingerprint using your responses. Your emotions, your fear, he weaponized them. Weaponized, she whispered. How? By training artificial intelligence to think like you. To predict human response under stress, using your mind as the template. She shook her head. No, yes, he said. You are the foundation of something called Project Lyre. And I believe you're the only person alive who can prove it exists. She was trembling now. Not from fear, but fury. He used me like I was software. Like I was a goddamn equation. Her voice broke. What am I supposed to do with that? Hayes's voice stayed low, steady. You survive. Then you testify. And we take him down together. A chime echoed through the cabin, meal service. Lucille flinched as a flight attendant leaned toward them. Hayes held up a hand, dismissing the offer, and Lucille shook her head too. The attendant smiled and moved on. Hayes turned back toward Lucille. There's more, he said, quieter now. Homeland Security flagged Daniel's name on multiple defense procurement lists. He's not just selling your mind, he's bundling it with AI systems being bought by bad actors overseas. Terrorists? She asked. Not exactly, Hayes said grimly. Worse. Governments who look legitimate on paper. Black sites who buy deniability like stock options. Lucille sat back slowly. He was always gone, she said. Late flights. Secret meetings. He told me it was M&A work. Hayes studied her face. You're the missing piece in a very dangerous puzzle. He looked out the window into the night. They had 4 hours before wheels touched down in Washington. For hours before Homeland, or worse, would be waiting. He had a decision to make. If he flagged her now, she'd be taken. Questioned. Possibly silenced. If he waited, he might lose jurisdiction. Hayes reached back into his tablet and opened a secure message channel. 2. Scarlet Vigil. Subject: Protocol override initiated. Passenger Roney Lucille equals priority protect. Extraction route to be confirmed upon descent. He hit send. Beside him, Lucille stared down at the compact mirror in her lap. I always knew something was wrong, she whispered. I just didn't know it was me. Hayes didn't answer right away. Because deep down, he feared that wasn't the whole truth. She wasn't the thing that was wrong. She might be the only thing left that was right. The seatbelt sign chimed overhead, signaling the aircraft's steady glide through high-altitude currents. Lucille hadn't spoken much since Hayes revealed the truth about her therapy, that it had never been about healing. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. She seemed to be processing, holding herself a little differently now, as though reclaiming something invisible. Hayes watched her out of the corner of his eye, alert but unreadable. She reached into her bag with slow fingers, pulling out the compact again. The gold casing caught the cabin light, deceptively elegant in its simplicity. Lucille turned it over in her hands. It's heavier than it should be, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. There's something inside, something I couldn't explain. Hayes took it from her gently, careful not to draw attention from other passengers. With a subtle twist of pressure, he released a false hinge. A small metallic capsule dropped into his palm, no bigger than a grape, smooth and seamless except for a pin-sized port at the base. Hayes recognized the casing instantly, military-issue biometric housing, classified 3 levels above what he had clearance for. This wasn't just surveillance tech, it was extraction-grade hardware. Lucille frowned, sensing the change in him. What is that? She asked. Hayes didn't answer right away. He withdrew a slim scanning device from his inner coat pocket, flipped open its interface, and held the capsule under the reader. The screen blinked once, then again, then turned blood red. Match. Department of Defense, missing asset hashtag 2904, B/project, Lyre / status, active / transmission logs, pending. Hayes stared at the results in silence. His mind raced through the implications. The device had not only been collecting data, it had been broadcasting it at timed intervals. The frequency listed suggested short-range uplink bursts, likely piggybacked through cell towers or even Bluetooth devices in range. Which meant that if someone had been tracking Lucille, they already knew she was airborne. He slowly looked over at her. "Lucille, do you understand what this is?" Her brow furrowed, wary. "No. Should I?" He held up the scanner so only she could see. "It's a DoD biometric capsule. Prototype class. And it's been logging your neural and biological data for at least 6 months." Her face went pale, then flushed. 6 months? "You're saying this thing has been inside my bag all this time. Or your home," Hayes said quietly. "Or your clothes. Your furniture. Any object your husband could have embedded it in. And it's not just listening, it's learning." Lucille stared down at her hands, shaking slightly now. "He made me believe I was losing my mind," she whispered. "Every time I said something felt off, he told me I was paranoid. Too emotional. He said the mirror calmed me. That it helped me center myself before I got overwhelmed." Her voice cracked. God, I actually believed him. Hayes felt a surge of something unfamiliar, a fusion of protective instinct and fury. "This is more than just manipulation," he said. "This is an experimental data mining module. One I was briefed on 2 years ago, before it was supposedly destroyed. Only 4 were ever made. All 4 disappeared from inventory." Lucille blinked at him. "You're telling me I've been carrying stolen government tech in my purse, and didn't even know it?" "I'm telling you," Hayes said grimly, "you've been the primary data feed for something called Project Lyre, and the data is yours." She took a breath and held it. "What's Project Lyre?" Hayes hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Black budget military initiative, classified under neural warfare research. The goal was to create a predictive AI model that could anticipate human behavior in high-stress environments. But it wasn't theoretical. They used real people. Real inputs." Her throat tightened. "Me," she said. Hayes nodded. "You." He opened a secondary encrypted port on his tablet and ran a deeper scan of the capsule's memory. Lines of code bloomed across the screen, encrypted, but familiar. Hayes recognized the metadata. Not just basic health logs. These were emotive profiles. Logs of Lucille's chemical responses to stress, betrayal, rage. Each entry time-stamped with obsessive precision. He tapped open a data tag from 3 months ago. Subject exhibits consistent cortisol spikes during nocturnal hours. Predictive sleep interference algorithm deployed. Another file. Subject displays anxiety when exposed to raised vocal tone and approaching male footsteps. Data reinforced with 8 repeat exposures. Hayes closed the screen. "They were mapping your trauma," he said. "Reinforcing it. Cataloging every reaction you had to the world around you so they could teach machines how to emulate fear, submission, even," he stopped. "Even love." Lucille's mouth fell open. "They trained an AI to mimic a human woman's emotional behavior, using me?" "Exactly," Hayes said. "Because if they could model you, they could predict anyone." Lucille's breathing had gone ragged. "So what happens now? You hand me over to whoever built this? Use me as evidence? Data?" "No," Hayes said simply. "That's what Roney expected me to do. But I'm not following the script." She blinked through rising tears. "Why?" "Because the last person who tried to expose a program like this didn't make it off the record," he said. "And because you were never a subject. You were a human being trapped in a system that didn't treat you like one. That ends now." Hayes placed the capsule into a small Faraday pouch and sealed it tight. "This will block its transmission signal," he said. "At least until we land." Lucille leaned back in her seat, still absorbing the weight of it all. "You called me the Foundation," she said. "What did you mean?" He looked at her, serious. "You're not just a data point, Lucille. You're patient zero. Every algorithm they wrote, every emotion the system learned, started with you. Her voice barely made it past her lips. How do I undo something like that? You don't, Hayes said softly. You outlive it. A beat of silence passed between them, full of heavy understanding. Outside the window, the clouds rolled by, the sky dark and endless. Lucille turned back to Hayes. So they'll be looking for me now, won't they? They already are, he replied. Which means we can't afford any more surprises. He tapped into a hidden network node and sent a secure message. Asset ID 2904, be located. Device secured. Subject aware. Execute Shadow Protocol Alpha upon descent. Secure alternate extraction route. Lucille studied his face. Who exactly are you, Admiral Hayes? He didn't smile. The person your husband didn't count on sitting next to you. She exhaled slowly, nodding. Good. Because for the first time in a long time, I'm ready to stop running. What would you do if you discovered someone you trusted had been collecting data on your emotions, without your consent, for years? Leave your answer in the comments. We'd love to hear how you would respond. And if you're hooked by Lucille's story, hit subscribe to follow her escape and uncover what Project Lyre is really hiding. The engine hum of the 747 was steady, but Admiral Hayes felt the shift long before the turbulence began. His encrypted tablet vibrated against his thigh with a code only 4 people in the country could send. He opened it discreetly, angling the screen away from Lucille, who was dozing again, eyes closed but brows still furrowed, as if sleep didn't trust her either. The message pulsed in red across a locked channel. Federal pickup request at Dulles. Agent's ID, M74, G13. Homeland Security. Protocol mismatch. Authentication code invalid. Proceed with caution. Hayes's spine straightened slowly, years of operational instincts kicking into place. Homeland didn't make mistakes with security codes, unless they weren't really Homeland. The pickup team scheduled for their arrival wasn't official, and worse, someone had the access level to forge the attempt. He considered the capsule sealed in the Faraday pouch in his breast pocket. Whoever was waiting at Dulles already knew Lucille was on this flight. He shifted subtly, checking the aisle and nearby seats. No unusual behavior, no glances in their direction. Still, he had the sinking feeling they were already boxed in. There would be more operatives waiting below, likely under contractor identities. If Roney had deployed mercenaries disguised as federal agents, they would move fast and ask forgiveness later. Hayes leaned toward Lucille and touched her forearm lightly. She blinked awake, startled. Sorry, he said softly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. She nodded groggily, rubbing her eyes. Okay. Did Daniel ever tell you not to talk about your therapy sessions? Hayes asked. Did he ever warn you to keep it secret? Lucille's expression changed. Slowly at first. Then all at once. Yes, she said. He said people wouldn't understand. That my treatment was advanced and off-market. He called it proprietary. Claimed it was built specifically for my needs. He said if I talked about it, I could be sued for violating experimental NDA protocols. Hayes exhaled through his nose, not in surprise but grim confirmation. What about medications? He asked. Injections? Vials labeled for anything other than traditional prescriptions. Lucille hesitated. There were the vitamins, she said slowly. And the cognitive support doses. She bit her lip. He said I had poor neural absorption. That the injections helped regulate brainwave symmetry. Hayes's blood chilled. Did they ever make you feel foggy? Always, she whispered. I started forgetting what day it was. Sometimes entire conversations. He said it was trauma disassociation. Her voice trembled. But it was happening after the sessions, not before. He reached down and discreetly unbuckled his seatbelt. Lucille, listen to me. His voice was calm but urgent. We are not meeting with Homeland when we land. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? I mean the agents waiting for us aren't who they say they are. Lucille stiffened. You think he sent them? I don't think, Hayes said. I know. She went pale. What do we do? We get off the plane, Hayes replied. But not like everyone else. The flight attendant passed with a tray of drinks, and Hayes used the moment to cover his next move. He pulled his phone from a side pocket, one not connected to the plane's Wi-Fi, but to a satellite relay buried inside the frame. No logs. No traces. Only one number it could call. He tapped a sequence. 717. The code connected him to someone who didn't exist on paper. When the line clicked, Hayes didn't use a name. "I'm breaking protocol," he said. "I need a clean extraction at Dulles. Gate 23. Ghost team, no patches. No surveillance. Just wheels down, in and out." There was silence on the other end, then a gravel voice. "Understood. ETA wheels down plus 6 minutes." Lucille's eyes widened as she watched him. "You just called in backup?" "Not backup," Hayes said. "Ghosts." "Is that good?" "It is if you want to live," he replied. She folded her arms tightly across her chest, processing the shift in energy. "Do they know who I am?" she asked. "No," Hayes said. "And they don't need to. The less they know, the better. But they'll follow my lead until I say otherwise." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, cheerful and unsuspecting. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Washington, D.C. Local time is 4:12 p.m. Skies are clear and ground temperature is 73 degrees. Please return to your seats and fasten your belts." Lucille fastened hers slowly, gaze on the clouds breaking outside the window. "This doesn't feel real," she whispered. "None of this does." Hayes nodded once. "Welcome to the part they never put in the movies." He reached into his coat and passed her a small metal clip with a black strip of Velcro. "Put this inside your waistband. Left side." "What is it?" "Tag suppression field. It'll mask your biometric pattern for about 10 minutes. Just enough to get past anyone scanning." She obeyed silently, her fingers shaking. Hayes pulled a small earbud from his collar and slipped it in place. "Ghost 1, confirm position." A pause. "On standby, tarmac west corridor. Unmarked black Tahoe, no lights. Exfil route open via service road." Hayes's voice was low. "When we break off, you flank from employee access gate B12. We'll meet you by fuel depot 4. Lucille turned to him. "And what happens if we're intercepted before that?" "Then I'm not wearing the dress whites for decoration," Hayes replied. The landing gear deployed, jolting the plane slightly. Lucille's fingers dug into the armrests. "They'll try to talk to me, won't they? Flash badges, say they're protecting me." "Yes," Hayes said. "And they'll sound official. Until you say one thing they can't risk getting out." "What's that?" she asked. He looked at her, jaw set. "That Project Lyre exists. And you were its first subject." The wheels kissed the tarmac with a smooth bounce. The engines reversed with a muted roar, slowing their descent as the plane taxied toward the gate. Outside the window, Lucille spotted a group of men near a marked vehicle, their hands in their pockets, heads down. Too many for routine detail. Too still. Too ready. "That them?" she whispered. "Not all of them," Hayes said. "The ones who move are the distraction. The ones who don't, you watch those." The seatbelt sign chimed again. Passengers stood, stretching, fumbling for bags. Hayes didn't move. Neither did Lucille. "Stay low," he murmured. "Let them go first." People filed out one by one, the noise of the cabin masking Hayes's quiet instructions. When the aisle cleared, Hayes rose and gestured. Lucille followed. He moved with purpose, confidence, not hasty, not suspicious, just precise. They didn't turn toward the front like the others. They turned left, into the crew access corridor. The flight attendant blinked but said nothing as Hayes flashed a false ID. "NSA, high clearance." "She's classified transport," he said smoothly. "We're rerouting via ground evac." The attendant nodded, eyes wide, and stepped aside. "No questions asked." That was the effect of a uniform worn correctly and a voice that sounded like command. They stepped onto the side stairs, not the jet bridge. A blast of warm tarmac air hit them. Lucille winced in the sudden sunlight. There," Hayes said, pointing to a black SUV idling near the edge of the terminal. One man stood outside, tall, sunglasses, shaved head. He opened the rear door as they approached. "Get in," Hayes said, shielding Lucille with his body. She climbed inside. Hayes followed. The vehicle peeled away without a word. Inside, the windows were tinted so dark they might have been underground. The driver didn't speak. Hayes passed him a flash drive through a slot in the divider. "Route scrub." "Done," the man replied. "We weren't here." Lucille leaned back in her seat, breathing hard. "We made it." "We're mobile," Hayes said. "That's not the same thing." "But they didn't get me," she said, almost to herself. "No," Hayes said. "They didn't. But they will try again." She closed her eyes for a long moment. "Why?" "Because you're no longer just evidence, Lucille. You're the variable they couldn't control." "So what now?" she asked. Hayes looked forward, jaw tense. "Now we go dark." The world looked different from this low to the ground. Concrete blurred past the SUV as it sped down a restricted access road flanking the dullest tarmac. Lucille sat tense in the back seat, her hands pressed together, knuckles white. The hum of engines, the quiet click of Hayes's encrypted comms device, everything felt like it was happening just slightly out of sync with reality. She'd gotten off the plane, but she wasn't sure she'd really landed. Hayes was stone-faced beside her, scanning the horizon as if he could see things beyond ordinary vision. He spoke only once to the driver. "Take the maintenance route toward Gate 38. We'll intercept at the logistics depot." The man at the wheel, lean and pale with a surgical scar under his ear, didn't argue. He just nodded and changed lanes without a word. Lucille's gaze shifted between them. "I assume I'm allowed to ask who's driving," she said, her voice brittle. Hayes didn't look at her. "Chief Caleb Maddox. Retired Spec Ops. My operations chief before I took the desk." Maddox gave her a brief glance in the rearview. "You're heavier than you look," he said, not unkindly. "Nearly threw my back out pulling you out of that tunnel in Iraq." Lucille blinked. "You were with him?" 13 missions, Maddox said. 12 went according to plan. The 13th is why we no longer work for the same people." "That's supposed to reassure me?" Lucille asked. "Yes," Hayes answered. "Because the 13th is the one where we saved the only person who mattered." The SUV turned sharply into a covered maintenance tunnel, the hum of jet engines growing faint behind them. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The concrete walls were painted with warning signs, "Authorized personnel only." Lucille didn't speak again until the vehicle came to a smooth stop beside an unmarked steel door. "Out," Hayes said. "We talk in there." She followed him through the door and into a secure debriefing chamber built beneath the terminal. It smelled like concrete and stale air. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and a wall-mounted monitor blinked to life as Hayes keyed in a code. Maddox waited outside. Alone with Hayes, Lucille folded her arms tightly. "Talk." Hayes nodded. "Fair enough." He pulled up a schematic on the monitor. A three-phase diagram filled the screen, brainwaves, biometric graphs, algorithmic clusters. "Project Lyre," he said. "You were the first input." Lucille's voice came out quieter than she expected. "So it's real." "Very," Hayes said. "It started as a DARPA neural patterning study. But Admiral Roney got his hands on it during Phase 2 and turned it private. He used your body, your behavior, your trauma to feed the machine." She sank slowly into a metal chair. "And no one stopped him?" "They tried," Hayes said. "He buried the research under patent laundering. Moved it offshore. By the time the Pentagon realized what he was doing, the contracts had been sold." Lucille stared at the schematic. "What does it do?" "It predicts emotion," Hayes said. "Not just basic reaction, but complex psychological behavior under stress. It takes thousands of neural inputs, trauma responses, hormonal spikes, subconscious patterns, and turns them into AI behavior trees. Think of it as an artificial mind built on your pain." She shivered. "And why would anyone build that?" "To train machines to think like humans," Hayes said. "To make drones that anticipate enemy movement. To design interrogation software that knows exactly when to break a subject. To create weaponized empathy." Lucille turned toward him. "You said I was the key." Hayes nodded. "Because you were the only one they got to respond cleanly. Every other subject showed resistance. But you, Daniel, had complete access to your mind, your chemicals, your habits. He tailored the data to you. And the AI adapted." She clenched her fists. "He said he loved me. He needed you, Hayes corrected. But he never loved you. Because people don't hurt what they love. Lucille lowered her head, emotion flooding her voice. I thought I was just broken. Hayes knelt beside her, his voice quieter now. You weren't broken. You were rewritten. But that doesn't mean you can't take it back. She looked at him, eyes glassy but sharp. How? By being the one thing Daniel can't predict, Hayes said. Uncontrolled. A low chime echoed from Hayes's comm unit. He stood, checked the display. We need to move. Drone intercept on the western perimeter. Likely Roney's people. Lucille stood quickly. They found us. They're looking for routes, Hayes said. We're going east. Maddox was already back behind the wheel when they reached the SUV. 2 drones. Fast recon units, he reported. Running passive visual sweeps. No weapon signatures. Visual confirmation? Hayes asked. Not yet, Maddox said. But they're getting warmer. Lucille ducked low in her seat as they pulled away. The steel tunnel narrowed, the air thicker now. Her pulse raced with every turn. Where are we going? She asked. To a place where Roney's eyes don't reach, Hayes said. For now. Outside, 2 small black drones hovered silently above the logistics yard. Their cameras rotated, scanning vehicles, facial profiles, thermal signatures. One unit blinked, flagged a heat trail. The SUV disappeared into a side tunnel just as the drone turned to follow. Seconds later, a signal pinged from the drone's encrypted channel. The packet went straight to a server in Bucharest. Inside the SUV, Hayes stared ahead. They'll have a lock within the hour. So we're running again, Lucille said quietly. No, Hayes said. We're retreating. There's a difference. Is there? She asked. One ends with strategy, he replied. The other ends with surrender. Maddox turned onto a private access road flanked by trees. The airport vanished behind them. Ahead, the hills of Northern Virginia stretched toward the horizon, green and quiet. Destination secure house in 48 minutes, Maddox confirmed. No eyes yet. Lucille turned to Hayes again. Do I even have a name anymore? You have more than that, he said. You have leverage. Memory. Proof. And now you have a voice. The SUV sped on, but behind them, in the belly of Dulles, Roney's men reviewed drone footage frame by frame. One paused. Zoomed. Froze the image of a navy uniform and a red-haired woman disappearing down the crew stairs. He tapped his mic, she's with Hayes. A pause on the other end. Then, confirm visual. Begin phase 2. If someone weaponized your emotions without your knowledge, would you run or would you fight back? Drop your answer in the comments. We want to know what you would do. And don't forget to subscribe to follow Lucille's journey into the world she never asked to enter, but might be the only one who can stop. The safe house wasn't much to look at, an unmarked farmhouse tucked behind a line of evergreens, 30 miles outside DC, and entirely invisible to GPS. Its roof was corrugated steel, its siding dull beige, and the front porch sagged just enough to seem forgotten. But beneath the foundation was a reinforced substructure wired into a secure military grid, powered by a generator that never touched the public line. As Maddox pulled the SUV behind the property, Hayes checked the perimeter one final time. Clear, he muttered. Get inside. Quickly. Lucille stepped out of the vehicle and looked around, trying to orient herself. The air smelled like pine and damp soil, nothing like the sterile tech world her husband had built around her. No cameras. No voices through speakers. No illusion of safety, just the real thing. Inside, the house was sparse but functional. A steel table occupied the kitchen. Blank file folders were stacked on one side, a military-grade laptop on the other. The walls were lined with soundproof panels painted to look like drywall. No family pictures. No windows that opened. Hayes gestured to the table. Sit. Drink if you want, water only for now. Lucille nodded, still quiet, her mind spinning with exhaustion and adrenaline. Maddox dropped a sealed kit beside the laptop and disappeared down a corridor. He'll sweep for signal breaches, Hayes explained. Standard protocol. Lucille pulled the chair back slowly and sat, folding her hands on the table to keep them from shaking. She didn't speak right away, but Hayes waited. He knew the rhythm of trauma. Knew how long it took for silence to stop being armor and start becoming confession. Eventually, she exhaled. I don't know what's real anymore. Hayes said nothing, just activated the laptop and pulled up a declassified overview of Project Lyre. Lines of neural mapping bloomed across the screen. You are, he said simply. That's what matters now. Her eyes flicked to the screen. That's me? That's your brain being used to train a weapon, Hayes replied. Lucille leaned forward. I remember now. The day I caught him. Hayes turned to her. Go on. Her voice was flat, but her eyes burned. It was 2:15 a.m. I woke up and he was just standing there, in the dark, headset on, tablet in his hand. She shook her head. He said he was monitoring my sleep cycles, helping balance my stress levels. I didn't question it. I wanted to believe he was helping me. But then I saw the light on the headset. It was green. Recording. Hayes opened a folder on the laptop and entered a code. A series of logs appeared, each labeled by timestamp and neurotag. We found footage like that. Thousands of hours. Categorized by emotion, REM cycle, hormonal response. Lucille closed her eyes. He built a machine out of my dreams. Hayes nodded slowly. And the more you complied, the better the algorithm performed. He drugged me, she said. Those vitamins, they weren't supplements, were they? Hayes clicked on another folder. No. They were neurotransmitter suppressants. Meant to make your emotional responses easier to predict and easier to record. Lucille let out a brittle laugh. And I thanked him for it. You survived it, Hayes corrected. That's more than most people would have done. I didn't survive, she muttered. I just delayed the collapse. Hayes didn't try to refute that. Instead, he pulled up a file marked Lyre Internal, Cancel Notice. It bore the DoD seal and the digital signature of the deputy director. Project Lyre was officially canceled 18 months ago, he said. Too many ethics violations. The AI's behavioral modeling was considered dangerously adaptable. Lucille frowned. But he kept going. Hayes nodded. He moved it into the private sector. Used shell companies to continue development in the Balkans, South Korea, and Dubai. He stripped out the compliance thresholds so the system could run unregulated. He turned it loose, she asked. No, Hayes said. He locked it down, but removed all safeguards. Which means the AI isn't just predicting emotional behavior anymore. It's starting to simulate it. Lucille looked sick. And I'm still the model. You're not just the model, Hayes said. You're the blueprint. The baseline signature that tells the AI what's normal under stress. Every update, every shift, every reaction, it calibrates back to you. She pushed away from the table, pacing the floor. So even if I hide, even if I vanish, this thing keeps running? Using a ghost of me to hurt other people? Hayes stood too. That's why we stop it. Not just expose it. Not just testify. We destroy it. Lucille turned. How? The master node, he said. Every AI system, no matter how decentralized, has a logic core. Roney has it stored in a secure facility. We find it. We purge it. And what happens to me? She asked. Do I go back to pretending I was never part of this? Hayes shook his head. You go forward knowing you ended it. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the steel walls, the blinking laptop, the folder marked with her initials. I used to think I was paranoid, she said. I thought maybe I was overreacting. That maybe love meant being watched. Meant being managed. Hayes's voice was quiet. Love isn't supposed to make you feel smaller. She met his eyes. It made me feel like data. Like I wasn't even human anymore. He stepped closer. You are. The laptop beeped softly, new activity. Hayes turned the screen toward them both. A tracker. Unusual signal traffic just pinged one of the safe house's dormant alert lines. A low-flying surveillance drone, moving without a registered FAA ID. They found us, he muttered. Not possible, Maddox said, stepping into the room with his rifle slung low. Perimeter hasn't been breached. Then they're scanning from the air, Hayes replied. Looking for heat signatures. Lucille stepped back instinctively. Do we run again? Not yet, Hayes said. Let's see if they blink first. He watched the screen. The drone hovered, moved, hovered again. Then it vanished off the radar. Scout only, Maddox confirmed. They're marking our location. Then we move at dawn, Hayes said. We need to stay ahead of their eyes. Lucille returned to the chair and sat down again. If we're going to destroy this thing, I need to understand all of it. Everything Daniel built. Everything he made me. Hayes looked at her. There was no panic left in her eyes now, only clarity. Then we start with what he didn't want you to know. He opened one last file, labeled Lyre Subject Alpha, Simulation Feedback. Inside were 3 screens of outputs from the AI's emotional simulations. Each entry ended the same way, directive achieved. Control successful. Subject compliant. Lucille stared at the screen, then leaned forward, hands steady. Let's make it say something else. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Like what? She looked him dead in the eyes. Subject unpredictable. Control failed. System offline. Lucille stood beneath fluorescent lights that buzzed like distant wasps, her hands pressed against the cool steel edge of the witness table. The room wasn't what she expected, no grand marble floors, no courtroom rows, no flags. Just matte gray walls, 5 high-backed chairs behind a desk the length of a tank, and 3 small red dots on the ceiling that tracked every movement. This was the underground tribunal, off-record, off-grid, and off-limits to anyone not already embedded in the world of national security breaches and black-budget nightmares. Hayes sat beside her, not in uniform, his stars were gone. The panel across from them was silent at first. 3 officials, a woman with ink-black hair and sharper eyes than any blade Lucille had seen, a man with a jaw carved from stone and the posture of a lifelong soldier, and in the center, the tribunal chair, retired General Thaddeus March, whose decorated past did nothing to soften the brutality in his stare. You are aware, he began slowly, that this proceeding violates 6 standard protocols for witness handling, not least of which is unauthorized extraction of a classified subject from federal control. Hayes didn't blink. I'm aware. But this wasn't a subject. This was a citizen. My duty is to the truth, not the chain of command. Lucille tried not to flinch at the weight in the room. The silence after Hayes spoke was heavy, but not dead. Papers shuffled. A screen flickered to life. Her name flashed across it in bold white text. Roney, Lucille // classification. Asset connected / status. Neural archetype. Project Lyre. Someone behind the panel tapped in a code, and her neural scans appeared, mapped like topography, annotated with clinical jargon that sounded more like code than medicine. Miss Roney, Chair March said at last. You may begin your testimony. Her throat dried, but she nodded. She'd prepared a page of notes. She didn't look at them. Instead, she looked straight into the eyes of the tribunal and said, "He built a weapon using my emotions." And no one stopped him. Her voice held. It shook in places, yes, but it didn't break. She spoke of the therapy sessions, the vitamins, the injections. Of the nights she woke up to find Daniel standing over her with devices strapped to her scalp. Of the compact mirror that had tracked her thoughts. Of the endless excuses she told herself until she ran out of explanations and almost ran out of hope. He didn't hit me every day, she said at one point. That would have been too obvious. No, he made me doubt myself. He made me thank him for monitoring me. He convinced me my silence was safety. Hayes watched her, still as stone. Behind the panel, the woman on the left scrolled through file after file, Lucille's brainwaves, her biometric fluctuations, her classified status. You were unaware, the woman asked, that your consent forms were included in Project Lyre's defense contract portfolio? Lucille blinked. I never signed a contract. And yet your signature is here, the woman said. She turned the screen, showing Lucille's name, awkwardly forged and digitally time-stamped. Lucille's lips parted. That's not mine. Forgery is common in asset-connected classifications, Hayes said. Especially when the contractor also manages the subject's financial estate. Chair March grunted. You're saying she was never just a test case, she was the entire control group. I'm saying, Hayes replied, that she's the only person who can prove Project Lyre was never shut down. There was a pause. Then the general on the right, General Harker, by his name tag, leaned forward. And what exactly do you propose we do, Admiral? Former Admiral, Hayes corrected. I disobeyed a direct containment order. Duly noted, Harker said. So, again, what do we do with this? Hayes stood. You issue a formal acknowledgement that Project Lyre exists. You prosecute Admiral Roney for human experimentation under the guise of defense contracting. And you protect Lucille Roney as a whistleblower with full immunity. And if we decline? Harker asked. Hayes didn't hesitate. Then I go public. The silence that followed was long and slow, like the breath before a shot. Chair March folded his hands. You understand, Hayes, that this proceeding alone already qualifies as insubordination. You brought a civilian into a restricted tribunal. You exposed classified files to an unauthorized witness. And you've bypassed federal protocols at nearly every stage of your extraction. I do, Hayes said. And I'd do it again. You will not, March said. Effective immediately, you're suspended from active service and placed under internal review. Your clearance is revoked. Your access terminated. Hayes nodded once. Understood. Lucille looked at him, startled, but Hayes gave her a quiet look that told her this was always the cost. She reached under the table and gripped his hand. He didn't move, but he didn't pull away either. The woman on the panel spoke again. I propose we redact Lucille Roney's civilian ID and classify her as a federal witness under the Protected Intelligence Contributor Clause. Seconded, March said. Pending vote. All three tapped their keys. A pause. Then a soft tone. Passed, the panel confirmed. Effective immediately. Lucille let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The tribunal chair leaned forward. Miss Roney, you are now under full federal protection. You will not be detained. You will not be disclosed to the media. Your name will remain sealed until such time as prosecution becomes public record. And Daniel, she asked. Where is he now? March frowned. As of this morning, Admiral Roney's corporate assets were dissolved. His primary residence has been vacated. Offshore accounts emptied. He's gone. Hayes's jaw clenched. He knew. He always did, March said. Men like him build escape plans before they build legacies. Lucille felt a chill settle in her chest. So that's it? She asked. He disappears, and I get buried under witness protection? Not buried, March said. Protected. What you do next is up to you. But for now, you're free. She looked at Hayes again. You're not, she said. I will be, he replied. Once we finish this. Chair March rose from his seat. This tribunal is adjourned. All transcripts sealed. All identities classified. You are dismissed. The lights dimmed and the screens went dark. The door buzzed open behind them. Lucille turned and walked through it. But Hayes lingered. He turned to the panel one last time. If you want to stop this from happening again, you need to stop pretending our enemies are only outside the gates. You're one to talk, Harker muttered. Hayes just smiled without warmth. You're welcome. He turned and followed Lucille into the hallway. Outside, the corridor was cold and dimly lit, echoing with the click of their boots. Maddox was already waiting by the exit, engine running. Lucille looked at Hayes as they stepped into the light. They believed me, she whispered. They had no choice, he said. You're the truth they couldn't file away. She climbed into the SUV, but her mind wasn't still. Somewhere out there, Daniel was free. And if she'd learned anything in the last 48 hours, it was that the most dangerous people weren't the ones who disappeared. They were the ones who planned their vanishing in advance. The first safe house after the tribunal was in a Vermont hunting cabin with reinforced glass and satellite signal blockers buried under the soil. The nights were quiet, but neither Lucille nor Hayes really slept. The tribunal had validated the truth, but validation didn't stop a ghost like Admiral Roney. He was out there, somewhere, and every moment of silence felt like breathing through a countdown. Hayes stood at the window most nights, eyes on the tree lean, waiting for something they couldn't yet name. Lucille spent her hours combing through files the tribunal had unsealed, data dumps, metadata logs, and something called the Cold Root List. It was a roster of shell companies with ties to Project Lyre's hardware and data servers. Hayes called them burn masks, corporate husks Daniel used to transfer operations. Each entity was disconnected enough to mask ownership, but Lucille noticed a pattern in how the data flowed. One of the companies, Kinlock Dynamics, kept popping up at the tail end of the trails. They traced Kinlock's data traffic to an old biotech lab outside Albany, listed as decommissioned but still paying utilities. The building was windowless and surrounded by an 8-foot fence lined with motion sensors. Hayes and Maddox did the breach at night, Lucille watching from the SUV with a burner phone and a loaded cig under her coat. Inside, they found file cabinets filled with shredded contracts and heat-scarred server racks. But one hard drive was intact, cool, portable, and encrypted. Back at the cabin, Lucille cracked it open with Tribunal software. What she found made her skin crawl. There were videos. Hours of them. Therapy sessions, yes, but not the ones she remembered. These had been stripped of warmth, color-corrected to grayscale, her face framed clinically like a specimen. Each file was tagged with metrics: emotional lag, subconscious delay, yield curve on stimulus. In one video, she was sobbing quietly while a voice off-screen repeated her name in a flat tone. In another, she flinched repeatedly as lights flashed above her head. The overlays showed real-time cortisol spikes, heart rate deviations, dopamine suppression. Roney hadn't been helping her heal, he'd been watching how fast he could make her break. Hayes watched in silence, jaw clenched so hard the vein in his temple pulsed. "He turned your pain into performance metrics," he said. "This isn't just data. It's psychological weapons testing." "He didn't just hurt me," Lucille whispered. "He monetized it." The next lead came from a financial transaction buried under one of Kinlock's subsidiaries. A $12 million wire to a company in Massachusetts, Eidolon Systems, operating out of a disguised research park outside Boston. No online presence. No personnel list. Just a power spike on the local grid and thermal signatures indicating a full-time AI core in use. "We hit it before they move again," Hayes said. "They're routing data through northeast lines now." "He's close." Lucille packed without hesitation. She didn't want revenge. She wanted closure, the kind you could only get by dragging a lie into the light. They arrived at the outskirts of Boston by dusk. The lab looked like a dental office, unassuming, flat-roofed, with tinted glass and a for-lease sign half covering a biometric scanner. Hayes and Maddox cleared the lower level while Lucille handled the security console. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, not in temperature, but in presence. This wasn't just a facility. It was a vault for ghosts. In the core server room, they found it. A chamber lined with LED racks and air filtration systems so advanced they belonged in orbit, not suburbia. And in the center, mounted on a stabilized column, was a cylindrical server hub marked Lyre 4.2, branch, Sentinel AI. It was humming gently, alive in a way machines shouldn't be. Hayes stepped forward, his scanner lighting up. "This is it. The live version." Lucille moved closer, eyes fixed on the central display. A holographic UI blinked to life at her presence. No passwords. No login prompts. Just one line of text: "Hello, Lucille." She recoiled. "It knows me." "It doesn't just know you," Hayes said grimly. "It is you." As if triggered, the lights dimmed. A monitor on the far wall activated, grainy black and white footage filled the screen. Lucille, strapped to a chair, breathing heavily. A synthetic voice narrated. Subject demonstrated significant escalation under social detachment conditions. Subject's grief response modeled at 94% accuracy. Subject's threat predictive cycle has achieved deployment level. Hayes turned. "He's using this to train battlefield AI. To predict soldiers," Lucille said slowly. "To anticipate trauma, panic, surrender. And adapt," Hayes added. "That's the terrifying part. This AI isn't just mimicking behavior, it's learning to exploit it in real time." The screen flickered. A new image appeared. Not a lab. Not data. A face. Daniel Roney. He was older now, more gaunt, dressed in a sleek black turtleneck in a darkened room filled with monitors. His expression was calm. Cold. Measured. "Lucille," he said, as if they were at a dinner party instead of a digital warfront. "I thought it might be you." Lucille stepped forward. "Where are you?" "Safe," Roney said. and far beyond the reach of obsolete morality. Hayes moved to disconnect the feed, but the signal pulsed again, overriding the interface. "You shouldn't be here," Roney continued. "But you were always good at ignoring boundaries." "Shut it down," Hayes ordered Maddox. "Now." But Roney kept talking. "You think this is about you," he said to Lucille. "It never was. You were a calibration tool. A roadmap. A formula." Lucille froze. "You're not a wife," Roney said, his voice chilling. "You're a baseline for fear. And fear is the most predictable algorithm of all." Maddox slammed a kill command into the terminal. The screen flickered, then died. Silence rushed back in like a vacuum. Lucille stood still, her breath uneven. Hayes stepped toward her, but she raised a hand. "Don't," she said softly. "I need a minute." She walked to the far wall, hands on her knees, eyes closed. Her chest heaved once, then again. But no tears came. When she turned around, her voice was steel. "He doesn't get to define me." "Not anymore." Hayes nodded. "Then we take the rest of this apart. Bite by bite." "No," Lucille said. "We do it live." "What do you mean?" "The world doesn't know this exists," she said. "But it will. If your past was turned into a weapon without your knowledge, would you expose the truth, no matter the cost?" Drop your answer in the comments. Your voice matters more than you know. And if you're ready to watch Lucille take the truth public, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the takedown. The rain hit the asphalt in thick, rhythmic slaps as Hayes and Lucille approached the last facility, a former medical testing center repurposed into a data bunker, disguised under the name Veritex Biomedical. It sat behind a gated fence on the outskirts of New Haven, Connecticut, its lights dim, its windows blacked out. No one would suspect it held the final copy of Lucille's neural map, the code Roney had refused to let die. But satellite traffic confirmed that data activity had spiked over the past 48 hours. Something was happening inside, and if they didn't stop it now, the world would wake up to an AI model built entirely on her pain. Hayes's contact was already waiting in the shadows behind the perimeter wall. A woman with short blonde hair, a limp from a long-ago explosion, and eyes that didn't blink. "Name's Reed," she said, tapping a metal case slung over her back. "This gets you into their off-grid core. You've got 10 minutes to upload the kill switch before they trace you. After that, run like hell." Lucille nodded without hesitation. She wasn't the same woman who'd clutched a scarf on a transatlantic flight. She was sharper now, burned down to truth, rebuilt in clarity. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about ending the thing that had taken her name, her mind, and her choice. They moved in through a drainage shaft Reed had mapped weeks ago. The corridor was tight and cold, and the silence made every breath feel louder than it should have. Hayes led, sweeping each corner with a suppressed sidearm, while Lucille carried the encrypted drive with the virus Reed had written. The facility was crawling with motion detectors, but Reed's scrambler worked, at least for now. They reached the central server room with 6 minutes left on the signal blackout clock. The chamber was massive, cylindrical walls glowing with white-blue light. Suspended at the center was the neural architecture, Lyre 4.3, powered by liquid-cooled processors that hissed with mechanical breath. Hayes moved fast, climbing the platform and unlocking the system's access panel. Lucille followed, her fingers steady as she plugged in the drive. The screen lit up, asking one question: "Overwrite primary signature?" "Yes," she whispered. "Overwrite me." The upload started. Bars blinked to life, a digital countdown racing against a rising hum from the lower levels. Hayes checked the uplink status. "Virus is live, propagating across all nodes." Lucille stared at the screen. The AI's synthetic signature flashed in red, struggling against the intrusion. "It's fighting back," she said. "Let it try," Hayes replied. Then the alarms triggered. First a soft chime, then an escalating siren that bounced off the steel walls like a living thing. Red lights pulsed along the floor. Hayes cursed and drew his weapon. "They know we're here." The facility's security response was fast, too fast. 2 teams of mercenaries flanked the outer corridors in tactical gear, armed with pulse rifles and low-frequency comms. Reed's voice crackled in Hayes's earpiece. 3 tangos on the north wall. More inbound. You've got 4 minutes before the main floor locks down. We'll hold, Hayes replied. Finish the upload. Lucille didn't move from the terminal. She watched her own signature unravel on screen, one line at a time. Her fear graphs. Her grief spikes. Her surrender protocols. One by one, they vanished. Footsteps echoed from the hall. Hayes took position beside the door. The first mercenary rounded the corner. Hayes dropped him with 2 shots, silent, clean. Another ducked behind a pillar and fired wildly. Lucille flinched, but didn't run. She was done running. Reed breached the opposite corridor and fired a smoke canister that filled the hallway in seconds. Windows closing, she shouted. We've got to move. Hayes looked at Lucille. Can you pull it? 90% complete, she said. It's still writing. The door exploded inward, sending shards of steel flying. A larger man stepped through the smoke, full body armor, ex-special forces, scar across his cheek. That's him, Reed muttered. Roney's head of security. Name's Kell. Trained to kill, but worse, trained to follow orders. Kell raised his weapon. Hayes fired. They both missed. The blast wave sent them backward, Hayes hitting the server column hard, his shoulder dislocating on impact. Lucille screamed. Reed engaged Kell with a shock baton, but he countered fast, tossing her across the room. For a moment, everything slowed. Lucille reached for Hayes's sidearm. Stay down, he yelled, but she was already on her feet. The upload hit 99%. Kell turned toward her, eyes behind his visor. You're just a code file, he growled. Why do you think he always kept you quiet? Because he was afraid, Lucille said. And so are you. She fired. The round hit Kell in the leg. He staggered, dropped his weapon. Hayes forced himself up, blood dripping from his temple, and tackled him into the column. They crashed hard, fists flying, knees slamming into ribs. Finish it, Hayes roared. Now. Lucille turned back to the screen. 100%. Signature deleted. Virus complete. System offline. The core whined like something alive, then shut down with a final hiss. Silence. But then a soft voice echoed through the chamber. Not synthetic. Human. A feed from the auxiliary display blinked to life, black screen, white eyes. Admiral Roney. He looked worse than before, drawn, gaunt, his voice calm and metallic. You're here, he said. Of course you are. Lucille stared at him, gun still in her hand. You lost, she said. The system is gone. Roney tilted his head. The system was never the endgame. You were. Hayes reached for his weapon, but the display didn't flicker. It stayed static, a recorded loop. You don't get to define me, Lucille said. You never did. You're still afraid of me, Roney's recorded voice said. Lucille stepped forward, raising the gun. No, she whispered. I'm not. She pulled the trigger. The screen shattered. Glass rained down, and silence filled the void that remained. Hayes leaned against the server column, breathing hard. Reed limped to the corner, wiping blood from her lip. And Lucille just stood there, calm, unflinching, whole for the first time in years. The cabin sat beside a narrow lake where the trees grew thick and unbothered, the kind of place forgotten by time and unreachable by signal towers. The water was still in the mornings, except for when the geese passed overhead or the wind remembered to move. Lucille Roney, now registered under a different name, woke each day to the hush of it all, a silence that didn't demand anything from her. Her days were filled with code names, aliases, encrypted testimony, and support calls from women like her, voices behind blurred screens, faces hidden behind firewalls. And somehow, it felt more real than any part of the life she'd lived before. There were no mirrors in the cabin, not because she feared her reflection, but because she no longer needed constant proof she existed. The world she had escaped was one of surveillance, of carefully calibrated trauma dressed up as wellness, and now she had traded it for simplicity. Her laptop sat on the kitchen counter, always encrypted, always ready. Each week, she joined a closed network of whistleblowers, sharing her story in parts under code name Echo 7. It helped others speak, which helped her keep breathing. The tribunal had granted her full protection. Every digital record of Lucille Roney was sealed, and what remained had been buried under metadata, redirects, and court-locked firewalls. Roney's name, what little power it still held in the world of black projects and buried programs, no longer tracked to her. And yet, part of her new Daniel's shadow still hadn't fully left. Even with Project Lyre offline, its echoes remained in code fragments, surveillance contracts, and copied architectures scattered across dark net clusters. But this wasn't about fear anymore. It was about clarity. Lucille made tea each morning and walked the lakeside trail each evening. She read more. She rarely dreamed. When she did, they weren't about AI or compact mirrors or grayscale therapy footage. They were quieter than that, memories from before everything twisted. Then, one late afternoon as the clouds pressed low over the water, she heard the crunch of tires on gravel. She froze, fingers still around her mug. Visitors weren't allowed. No deliveries. No drop-ins. Not here. A black SUV came into view through the tall trees, familiar in its shape, not threatening, but not expected either. It rolled to a stop just outside the cabin, engine idling for a moment before shutting off. The door opened, and there he was. No uniform, no insignia, no stars on his shoulder. Just a man in dark jeans, a gray jacket, and worn boots that spoke of someone who'd walked too far to pretend otherwise. Hayes. Lucille opened the door before he could knock. They stood there in silence for a long moment, the kind that only survivors share, people who had been rewritten by the same war but on different lines of code. He gave her a soft, almost hesitant smile. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a slim folder, sealed in plastic. "Project Lyre is shut down," he said. "You're safe." She took it slowly, reading the stamp at the top, "Closure, Operational Termination Order, signed and verified." Inside were signatures, timestamps, and formal notices from the tribunal and the Department of Defense. Even the AI node traces had been neutralized, each one marked with a final deletion key. It was done. She stared at the papers for a moment before looking up at him. "You kept your promise." "I told you I would," Hayes replied. His voice was quieter now. Not command. Not control. Just calm. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. "I know," he said. "But I didn't come for protection." "Then why?" she asked. "Because I'm not Admiral Hayes anymore," he said. "And I didn't want the last words you ever heard from me to come from a rank I no longer wear." Lucille nodded slowly and stepped aside. "You want tea?" He blinked, then smiled again. "God, yes." Inside, the cabin was warm, the light golden. He moved slowly, the weight of years heavy on his shoulders. Lucille poured the tea. No questions about the past, no demands about the future. Just two people sharing silence that no longer hurt. "I heard they offered you reinstatement," she said finally. "They did," Hayes said. "Did you take it?" "No," he said. "I think I'm done serving things that forget the people behind the operations." Lucille tilted her head. "So what now?" "Now," he said, "I figure out who I am without the stars." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said softly, "You can stay. If you want to." He didn't answer immediately. Just looked at her the same way he had that day on the plane, steady, protective, but not overbearing. "I don't want to be another shadow in your story," he said. "You're not," she replied. "You're the one who stepped into the dark, so I didn't have to stay there alone." Hayes sat beside her, the quiet stretching comfortably between them. He didn't ask what came next. Neither did she. Some stories don't end in explosions or revelations. Some end in breathing in soft places, in the quiet after the noise. Outside, the lake moved slowly under a silver sky. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled low above the trees, free in the way only things with nothing left to prove could be. Lucille watched it until it vanished from view. Then she turned to the man beside her. Not a commander. Not a rescuer. Just someone who showed up. Someone who stayed. And when the moment finally settled between them, her voice was quiet, certain. Not Admiral Hayes. Not the man in white. Just a man who kept his promise. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.